talking about the best defensive units in NFL history, we usually think of the '85 Bears, the 2000 Ravens, or the Legion of Boom. However, there is one group that is often forgotten and not mentioned amongst those other elite defenses. That would be Denver's 2015 unit, whose secondary was dubbed the no-fly zone for their elite lockdown coverage. But it wasn't just the secondary. This defense also included some of the best pass rushers we've seen in the NFL, in Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware, who terrorized opposing quarterbacks and offensive lines with their relentless pressure and elite pass rushing skills. This was a unit that single-handedly carried a Broncos team whose offense had fallen off and was being led by Brock Osweiler and the shell of Peyton Manning to a Super Bowl victory off the back of their dominant defensive play. Although they didn't have the longevity as some of the other great defenses, this 2015 Broncos D is still amongst one of the best defenses we've seen in the NFL and was absolutely loaded with Hall of Fame and All-Pro talent. In this video, we'll take a look back at how this defense came to be and what ultimately happened to this historic group. To begin this story, we'll start back in 2011 when the Broncos selected Von Miller with the second overall pick in that absolutely loaded 2011 draft class. Miller would go on to be the team's best defensive and arguably overall player, as well as one of the best defensive players in the NFL. As most people already know, Miller has had an excellent NFL career and is a future Hall of Famer. With his explosive speed and technique, he's been a nightmare for opposing offenses. Since entering the league, Miller has been a Defensive Rookie of the Year, 3-time First-Team All-Pro, 4-time Second-Team All-Pro, and 8-time Pro Bowler, and has already recorded 123.5 sacks. So for me, this was the beginning of what would become an all-time great defense. In that same 2011 season, the Broncos would also sign a relatively unknown cornerback prospect named Chris Harris Jr. Harris was an undrafted free agent coming out of Kansas, who would become the first of two lockdown corners in Denver's no-fly zone. Harris had excellent man coverage skills and would eventually be viewed as one of the best slot corners in the league during his prime. With the additions of Miller and Harris, Denver had acquired two cornerstone players who would become defensive stars and leaders of this Broncos defense for years to come. Heading into the 2012 season, the Broncos front office continued to build off the foundation they laid in 2011 with key additions to their front seven in the 2012 draft. In that draft, the Broncos would select defensive end Derek Wolfe in the second round, defensive end Malik Jackson in the fifth round, and linebacker Danny Trevathan in the sixth round. All three of these players would play key roles in this Broncos front seven and added depth and versatility to this unit. Wolfe and Jackson were big physical ends who were perfect fits in that Broncos 3-4 defense and served as complementary players to Denver's elite pass rushers on the outside. At the second level, middle linebacker Danny Trevathan served as a field general in the middle of that Broncos D, providing versatility with his tackling and coverage skills. Although Denver was continuing to invest in its defensive core, the arrival of Peyton Manning in 2012 would overshadow all of that, with the focus and strength of the team being on offense. The Broncos would assemble one of the most explosive units of all time, with Peyton Manning, Demaryius Thomas, Wes Welker, and Julius Thomas, just to name a few. Heading into 2013, everything would come together for that group, as they would go on to have one of the best offensive seasons of all time, breaking all sorts of individual and team records en route to Super Bowl 48. Unfortunately for Denver, that Super Bowl would be a rude awakening, as they would get absolutely smashed by the Seahawks 43-8. Denver looked completely helpless in that game, with Seattle scoring at will from start to finish. That game would shine a light on the Broncos' defensive deficiencies and would ultimately lead John Elway to make major investments into the defense to try and cover up some of those holes. Heading into the 2014 season, the Broncos would go on a major spending spree to bring in some big-name players to the defense. On March 11th, Denver signed cornerback Aqib Talib to a 6-year, $57 million deal, along with safety TJ Ward to a 4-year, $23 million contract. The very next day, they would also sign outside linebacker DeMarcus Ware to a 3-year, $30 million contract. Along with their big free agent signings, the Broncos would also add cornerback Bradley Roby in the draft, as well as undrafted free agent Shaquille Barrett at linebacker. These signings would provide a major boost to this defensive group, which was now amongst the most talented in the league. Hall of Famer DeMarcus Ware was one of the most dominant pass rushers throughout his time in the league, and arguably one of the best all time. In his 9 seasons with Dallas, he had already recorded 117 sacks and was the perfect player to pair with Von Miller in the front seven. The additions of Talib, Ward, and Roby, alongside Harris Jr. in the secondary, would lay the foundation of what would become the no-fly zone. Talib was a tall, physical corner who could lock down receivers on the outside with his excellent man coverage skills, while Ward served as a tough and versatile safety who would come up and support in the run game with his tackling and hard-hitting play style, as well as drop back into coverage and defend against the pass. With the major investments from the Denver front office, the Broncos now had arguably the best pass rush, as well as the best secondary in the league heading into the 2014 season. Similar to the year before, Denver would cruise through the regular season. Peyton Manning and the Broncos offense continued to put up impressive numbers. However, they were now supported by this retooled Denver defense that was shutting down opposing offenses. That season, the Broncos D would finish 3rd in total yards allowed and 2nd in rushing yards allowed. Up front, Von Miller continued to lead the charge, finishing the year with 59 tackles, 14 sacks, as well as a forced fumble. His newly added pass rush partner, DeMarcus Ware, would have 40 tackles, 10 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles of his own. In the secondary, the newly acquired Aqib Talib would finish the year with 63 tackles and 4 interceptions, while Chris Harris Jr. would tally 54 tackles and 3 interceptions. And although he missed some time due to injury, TJ Ward would still manage to record 74 tackles, 2 sacks, and 2 interceptions. Miller, Ware, Talib, Harris, and Ward would all make the Pro Bowl that season, while Von Miller and Chris Harris would also earn second-team All-Pro honors. The Broncos would once again win the AFC West while clinching the second seed in the AFC at 12-4, which was tied with New England for the best record in the conference. After their embarrassing Super Bowl performance the year before, Denver was looking to redeem themselves heading into the 2014 postseason. Their first matchup would be against Peyton Manning's former team, the Indianapolis Colts, led by Andrew Luck. The game was tight early on, with Denver only leading by 7 points after the first quarter. However, the Colts would quickly respond with 14 unanswered points in the second quarter before a field goal by Connor Barth at the end of the half would bring the score to 14-10 heading into halftime. Unfortunately for the Broncos, things would fall apart in the second half. Although the defense only gave up 10 more points that game, the Broncos offense could only manage a single field goal in the second half and would ultimately lose the game 24-13. For the second year in a row, Denver would be bounced from the postseason after such a promising season. On top of that, the team they lost to was Peyton Manning's former team, led by the guy who replaced him. You know that was a game he and his teammates really wanted to win for him. That being said, there were still some positives from that season. The offense continued to put up numbers, while their new-look defense was showing some real promise in its first full season together, which gave Denver something to build off going into next year. The 2015 season would see some major changes for this Denver team, both in its personnel as well as its play style. After losing in the divisional round in 3 of the last 4 seasons, the Broncos would make the decision to part ways with John Fox and bring in new head coach Gary Kubiak. Along with Kubiak, Denver would bring in defensive coordinator Wade Phillips, whose defensive scheme would help propel this group to another level. That season, we would also see a shift from a team that was built around its high-scoring, explosive offense to a group that was led by its lockdown defense. Part of this was out of necessity, as Peyton Manning would have a major decline in the 2015 season as he battled through injuries and inconsistent play. However, this is where all of those investments on the defensive side of the ball would pay off big time. Along with all of their returning stars, the Broncos would also add safety Darian Stewart ahead of the 2015 season, which would officially complete the no-fly zone secondary and would kickstart one of the best defensive seasons we've seen in league history. With the Denver offense struggling throughout the year, alternating between Manning and backup Brock Osweiler, who would eventually be named the starter following a game in which Manning threw 4 interceptions and posted a passer rating of 0, the defense would really have to carry this team, and that's exactly what they did. The 2015 Broncos defense played absolutely lights out and dominated opposing offenses with their relentless pass rush and lockdown secondary. That season, Denver's defense would rank first in total yards, passing yards, sacks, and forced fumbles, while also ranking 4th in points per game and 3rd in rushing yards per game. Up front, Von Miller would end the year with 11 sacks and 4 forced fumbles, while DeMarcus Ware would tally 7.5 sacks as well as a forced fumble. Along with their 2-star pass rushers, D lineman Malik Jackson and Derek Wolfe would each contribute 5 sacks of their own. In the secondary, Aqib Talib would have 45 tackles and 3 interceptions, while Chris Harris would record 58 tackles, 2 forced fumbles, and 2 interceptions. For TJ Ward, he would manage to tally 61 tackles, 2 sacks, as well as 2 forced fumbles. Once again, Miller, Ware, Talib, and Harris would all be Pro Bowlers, while Von Miller would earn first-team All-Pro honors, and Chris Harris Jr. would make second-team All-Pro. Despite all of the team's offensive issues, Denver still managed to win the AFC West for a 5th year in a row, while also clinching the number 1 seed in the conference at 12-4. With Peyton Manning back as the starting QB, Denver was looking not only to redeem the last couple of disappointing playoff exits, but also trying to win another ring for Manning, as it became pretty clear that this would most likely be his final season. The Broncos would start their postseason run at home against the Pittsburgh Steelers in the AFC divisional round. This game would be neck and neck throughout. Both teams would go back and forth throughout the first 3 quarters of the game, with the Steelers clinging on to a 13-12 lead heading into the 4th quarter. A late-game fumble by Pittsburgh would help Denver pull away late, as they would eventually go on to win the game 23-16. Next up for the Broncos would be their old foes, the New England Patriots, with Tom Brady and Peyton Manning matching up against each other one last time with the trip to the Super Bowl on the line. And once again, this would be a tightly contested matchup that was largely a defensive battle throughout. However, Denver would manage to take a 17-9 lead heading into halftime. In the second half, the Bronco defense would continue to shut down the Patriots offense and would take a 20-12 lead in the 4th quarter. Just when it looked like the game was over, Brady would march down the field and throw a touchdown pass to Gronk with 17 seconds remaining, bringing the score to 20-18. With New England needing a 2-point conversion to tie, the game came down to one last play. Brady would once again try to get the ball to Gronk in the end zone, but would be picked off by Bradley Roby to end the game. This was a huge moment for Peyton Manning and the Broncos, knocking off the defending champions and punching their ticket to Super Bowl 50, where they'd be matched up against the Carolina Panthers and league MVP Cam Newton. That season, Carolina was absolutely rolling heading into Super Bowl 50 after losing only one game all season at 15-1 and cruising through the playoffs behind their league MVP quarterback and excellent defensive play. Although this was a highly anticipated matchup, Super Bowl 50 would be the crowning achievement of this Broncos defense, who would show out and dominate this game from start to finish. Von Miller wreaked havoc on the Panthers offense as they had no answer for him. After taking a 3-0 lead, Miller would strip sack Cam Newton, leading to a fumble recovery in the end zone by Malik Jackson to give the Broncos a 10-0 lead in the first quarter. The Panthers would only be able to scrape together 10 points the entire game, but with Denver not able to do much on offense themselves, the score remained close in the fourth quarter. With the Broncos up 16-10 late into the fourth quarter, Newton would try and lead the Panthers on a late-game comeback. But as we'd seen throughout the season, the Broncos defense would once again save the day. With 4:51 remaining, Von Miller would have yet another strip sack, leading to the infamous moment where Cam Newton chose not to dive on the fumble, which would be recovered by TJ Ward, effectively ending the game. The Broncos would win the game with a final score of 24-10, with Von Miller earning Super Bowl MVP honors. This was an iconic moment for the Broncos for a number of reasons, starting with Peyton Manning's final game in the NFL, riding off into the sunset as a champion one last time. This was also the perfect way to cap off an historic season by this defensive unit, who carried this mediocre offense all the way through the regular and postseason and eventually to a championship. And talking about the best defenses of all time, I do think this Broncos defense should be in the conversation, especially in terms of single-season performances. However, due to the lack of longevity, many people forget or don't mention this group in the same breath as the 2000 Ravens, the LOB, or others. And although most of this group would return for 2016, they were unable to create that same success they had found in that 2015 season, and things would gradually begin to go downhill. Over the next few seasons, this defensive group would slowly disband. DeMarcus Ware would retire at the end of 2016, while TJ Ward would leave for free agency that same year. Aqib Talib would depart from the team the following season in 2017. By this point, it was obvious the Broncos were looking to rebuild their roster. 2019 would be the final season for Chris Harris Jr., leaving only Von Miller, whose time with the Broncos would end after 10 seasons in 2021. I found this topic to be very interesting. Although it felt like a flash in the pan, this 2015 Broncos D was still able to leave their mark in NFL history and did so in a unique way. For the most part, teams that are primarily assembled through free agency over a short period of time often fail to build that chemistry and fall short of expectations. However, for that group, in that particular moment of time, they found a way to come together and achieve something special that was bigger than themselves, and I think there's something to be said for that. On that note, that's going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I'd really appreciate it if you considered liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Let me know where you rank this defense down below in the comments, as well as any suggestions for a team, player, or topic you'd like to see me cover next. As always, I appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.